Okay, so ขออนุญาตแจ้งให้ทุกท่านทราบนะครับว่าการสัมมนาครั้งนี้จะมีการอัดคลิปไว้เนาะแต่ว่าจะเป็นการอัดคลิปเฉพาะช่วงที่วิทยากรบรรยายเท่านั้นนะครับส่วนในช่วงของการถามตอบเนี่ยจะไม่มีการอัดคลิปเนาะในครั้งนี้นะครับ so for this lecture we will record the lecturing session but in the Q&A and discussion we won't record this so yeah thank you All right, for the Q&A session today, if anybody would like to ask the question to the speaker today, both English and Thai is welcome. But if you pose a question in Thai, either speaking or typing, we will have Ajaliwa today to translate the question to English for you. สำหรับการถามตอบในวันนี้นะครับก็จะมีการถามตอบทั้งภาษาไทยมีการถามคำถามได้ทั้งไทยทั้งอังกฤษเนาะสำหรับผู้ที่สะดวกถามเป็นภาษาไทยนะครับก็เดี๋ยวจันลิวาจะเป็นผู้แปลคำถามให้ทางวิทยากรได้รับทราบนะครับ
จริงถามเป็นภาษาไทยก็ได้ผมเข้าใจ
ได้อยู่ใช่ไหมครับ
สะดวกตอบเป็นภาษาอังกฤษจะดีกว่านะครับ
โอเคครับขอบคุณมากครับขอบคุณมากครับOkay, so I think this is a great opportunity for the participants today that they can ask in Thai and you can understand because I mean in the past lectures we all conduct the seminar in English, yeah, but as the topic today is related to Thailand, so they may have some doubts or some points that they would like to raise, and there are lots of undergrad students today too. Yeah. All right. So now it's 5 minutes past 4 already. So I'm welcome everyone again to the seminar, the 5th session of the seminar today by Professor Patrick Sakdapolrak. And in this stance, I will let Dr. Liwa Phat Thaisong, who is the head of department in geography, and she also has the expertise in population geography, in aging, in migration, and about disaster resilience as well. So please welcome Ajarย์ลิวา to introduce the speaker today. เชิญอาจารย์ลิวาครับ
Thank you อาจารย์เผ่าไทย and sorry. It is an honor to introduce you all to Professor Dr. Patrick Sakdapolrak, who has kindly accepted the invitation to be here today. Professor Patrick Sakdapolrak is a professor of population geography and demography at the University of Vienna, Austria. He studied geography at the University of Heidelberg, Germany, and obtained a master's degree in social change and development at the University of Wollongong in Australia. He got his PhD from University of Bonn, Germany, and his PhD thesis is about health vulnerability among poor urban groups in India. His research is primarily concerned with the question of how vulnerable groups live with risk. He is interested in how people cope with and adapt to environmental and social stresses. He worked on the conceptual development of social vulnerability, livelihoods, and social resilience approaches, as well as migration and translocality. He worked empirically in Thailand, India, and Kenya. He has published his research in many international journals, such as in Geography Compass, Area, Population, Space and Place, Global Environmental Change, GeoForum, Singapore Journal of Tropical Geography, nature, climate change, and many, many more. So today he's going to talk about translocal resilience, environmental change, migration, and social resilience in rural Thailand. So please welcome Professor Patrick.
Thank you very much อาจารย์ริวาขอบคุณมากนะครับทุกท่านที่ได้มาวันนี้ต้องขอโทษด้วยที่ผมไม่สามารถพูดเป็นภาษา ภาษาไทยได้แต่ถ้ามีคำถามหลังจากที่ผมพูดไปแล้วผมสามารถเข้าใจได้แต่จะตอบเป็นภาษาอังกฤษ and I feel much more comfortable unfortunately to speak scientifically in English, and now I would like to switch to English. So thank you very much, Ajahn Liwa, for the invitation. It's a great honor to be part of this lecture series here, and thank you very much for the kind introduction, and also to you, Ajahn Pautai, for hosting this meeting today. And it's a great opportunity to reconnect again with colleagues from Chiang Mai. We still can remember the great time that we had with the student group and the cooperation there. And I hope that we will have the chance to meet again also in person, not only virtually, but it's also great to meet virtually. So I just will share my screen right now. I hope it will work. It should work. Yeah, as you have heard already, today I will talk about translocal resilience, environmental change, migration, social resilience in rural Thailand. And I will present results from a research project where also other people have participated and contributed to significantly. And just want to mention them directly at the beginning, so their contribution is acknowledged here. So there's 5 PhD students. Some of them have finalized the PhD already. Till Rockenbauch, Simon Peth, Louise Post, also Kusopon Narushai Kuson, which I have seen that is also here today, and Kaylee Ober, and also Harald Sterli, who was coordinating the project. The talk that I will give today is embedded in, and the research that I will present today is embedded in kind of the bigger discussion about the implications of environmental change on migration, mobility, and also refugees movement. That is kind of the broader embeddedness of this research project. And in the first part of my talk, I will go into this issue and give you a bit context where the project is embedded in. In the second part, I will provide you some insights into the conceptual approach that we have used in this project, translocal social resilience. We'll give some details as it has structured the research that we have done. I will really briefly go into presentation of the research sites and the methods that we used, and then I will present to you selected empirical evidence from Thailand, but also from the place of destination, in this case of Thai migrants, in this case Singapore, and then I will conclude with few remarks. So the issue of environmental change and migration is an issue that at least here in Austria and in Germany, it's very often discussed. It is very often also presented in the media. It's an issue that also policymakers are taking up, and it's a recurrent issue that is it's discussed. Why it's important to address this issue and to consider this issue? There are at least 3 different examples that I want to highlight why we should consider it. We have seen in the past from extreme events like Hurricane Katrina in 2005 that these extreme events, and we know that they will be more frequent and more severe in future in the context of climate change, have profound implications for mobility and migration. Here in the case of the Hurricane Katrina, which has forced 1.5 million people to be evacuated when the storm landed, and it's a case that is very well documented. And in 5 years after the hurricane hit the coast of the US, the city of Louisiana still had 25% less inhabitants than in the pre-Katrina period. There are the second sample is related to kind of drought in the Horn of Africa. It's also an event that is regularly happening from time to time, and which is most often related to distress migration and forced displacement of many people who seek food and shelter somewhere else. And then it's important because there's repeatedly also presentations of what we can expect in future outlook when the climate change is evolving as it is at the moment, and what implication it has on migration and mobility pattern. And there are different estimates out there. Here, one estimate in the global future outlook of the Lancet said that we can expect 1 billion climate migrants by the year of 2100. So it's an issue that is kind of at the interlinkage between two important major global trends. That one is climate change, and the other one is migration and mobility. Now, I would like to give you a brief overview of the discussion, how it has evolved over time. In the beginning of in the 80s, where the environmental awareness was raising, the discussion about so-called environmental refugees also came up. So the question of habitability of Earth came up, and also the implications of it, which means that certain places are not habitable anymore, and that means that people need to move to seek shelter somewhere else. This discussion around the concept of environmental refugees heavily focused on environmental change, different forms of environmental change as the main driver of migration. It was very much influenced by kind of environmental determinism. That means that scholars who presented their work here said that there's quite a direct linkage between environment and mobility pattern. And the discussion is very much driven by environmental and security concerns. So people are addressing climate refugees in order to raise awareness for environmental issues, but also particularly in the global north, in Europe, but also in the US, security concerns were very much on the agenda, because people were fearing kind of billions of people who are moving to their countries. In this context, numbers are quite important issue in the policy and the public debate. And here you see different publications that has mentioned numbers of climate refugees that we can expect, that we have already, and that we can expect in future. Like a publication by Christian Aid, for example, who said that we can expect 300 million climate refugees by the year 2050. And these numbers are taken up by policymakers, but also by the media again and again, in order to highlight the importance of the issue, and that we need to do something about it. In the academic sphere, there's quite a consensus that most of these numbers have very weak scientific basis. So we can call them guesstimates, particularly the older numbers. Very often it's not clear if we talk about risk-exposed populations, stocks, or flows of migration. And what is common in most of the numbers, particularly the older numbers, is that there's a simplistic deterministic understanding of mobility. So in the case, if there's sea level rise, if there is a drought, this will kind of deterministically lead to mobility of people. And what is also common denominator of the numbers is that they are driven by certain interests. So people using these numbers in order to make the case for environmental concerns, for security concerns. So very often the situation of the migrants themselves, kind of the humanitarian dimension, is neglected issue. we have moved quite a bit from that kind of simple understanding of the relationship between environment and migration. And part of and kind of a milestone in this development is the Foresight report led by Richard Black, which was published 10 years ago, which highlighted the complexity of the relationship, which highlighted that environmental factors are not the only driver of migration, but environmental factors, climate change, and others are influencing existing drivers of migration, as migration is part of our globalized world, and people are moving for many different reasons, including social reasons, political reasons, demographic and economic reasons. And the second aspect that you can see here in this driver of migration framework is that the decision to migrate is not only influenced by that kind of macro factors and environmental factors, but also by meso level factors, intervening obstacles and facilitators, networks, policies, but also on kind of personal, on the micro level, on personal and household characteristics, which have an implication on the fact that you decide to migrate or not when you are exposed to certain risks, right? And then not everybody migrates. It's also very important takeaway from this framework, because some people also decide to stay or are not able to migrate, are forced to stay, are trapped. And we also need to consider this population when we talk about environmental change and migration. So just to highlight a bit the complexity and the contradicting evidence that is there. So there's lots of research, and it's kind of picking up also on environmental change and migration. And when you look into the empirical results, you will see that the story is not so so simple. So we have contradicting empirical evidence when it comes to the impact of environmental change on migration migration flows. Here just a small selected numbers of studies to highlight this. For example, Müller et al. In a study from Pakistan could show that flooding has modest to insignificant impact on migration, but heat stress has a stronger implication for long-term migration of men. For example, they highlight in their study that this is related to relief efforts by the state, which is there in the context of a flood, which is an event that is more kind of tangible and where the state has to intervene more drastically. And in the context of heat stress, which is more slow onset, this is not the case. And this is one of the factors that lead to the different mobility outcome in the context of climate-related risks. In another study on Katrina by Tine, 2013, could show that in the context of the Hurricane Katrina, even the evacuation of people was kind of socially differentiated. So Black and low-educated population was least likely to be evacuated prior to Hurricane Katrina, and was most likely to not have been able to be evacuated. So even the evacuation in the context of extreme event was socially differentiated. So social status is quite important to consider when it comes to mobility outcome in context of climate stress. And in another study from Thailand, my Ajahn Phnom Sak, also from the University of Chiang Mai, and myself, where we looked at how environmental stress has an impact on migration. In a study from North Thailand, we could show that not every environmental stress leads to migration, because people can adapt in situ and there's no need to migrate. But even though if people can adapt to environmental stress, migration can happen anyway, because people migrate to many different reasons, and this migration can have a positive also implication for climate change adaptation. So to different feedback loops, which I will go into more detail also in a second. So this is also an important. This study was part of a multi-country comparative case study, and this case study from Thailand also was important as many policymakers, particularly in Europe, but also in the US, where migration is considered as something to be prevented, also or often see kind of investing in climate change adaptation, which will have the outcome that people won't migrate. But this, of course, is it's not the case, because people are migrating not only because of adaptation to climate change. So the idea that I want to convey here is that migration is complex, and the migration in the context of climate change can be many things, right? It can be indicator for failed adaptation. When livelihood systems break down, people have no option but to migrate. Very often distress migration and forced migration, which has the implication that very often the human security and the well-being level of these people is decreasing. But on the other hand, migration can be also a sign of successful adaptation. If households are exposed to a drought, can send a household member away to earn money in the city. They're sending back remittances, and so the well-being of the household can be sustained through migration. And the same is the case for immobility. So if people are not migrating in the context of exposure to environmental stress, it can be a sign of failed adaptation. So if you don't have the opportunity to use migration as an adaptation, you are kind of trapped. This was one of the key messages of that foresight report that I mentioned, that, and these people are quite vulnerable and needs to be in the focus of also policymakers to help them relieve of, from their vulnerability. But on the other hand, immobility can be also a sign of successful adaptation, because if you are exposed to environmental risks and you can adapt successfully, there's no need to be mobile, and you can decide to stay where you are. So what I want to say here is that neither migration nor immobility can be considered as a success and failure. And I would propose that we need to take kind of degree of freedom and choice that people have in their decision to move or to stay as an indicator for assessing mobility and immobility in the context of climate change and environmental risks. I've started with the discussion about environmental refugees, and this discussion have moved on, and there is now also in the debate, policy and scientific debate, the notion of migration as adaptation, which kind of try to consider migration not as something exceptional, but migration as a normal aspect of life in a globalized world. Which seeks to understand migration as one of the livelihood strategies that households pursue in vulnerable livelihood systems. Migration adaptation take into account immobility, those who are left behind, trapped population, and also focus on the feedback effects of migration. And this was the kind of starting point of the project that I will present to you now, taking this notion of migration adaptation as starting point for the understanding of this complex relationship between environment and migration. This project was called Building Resilience Through Transparency, Climate Change, Migration, Social Resilience in Rural Thailand. Was funded by the German Ministry for Education and Research for 5 years. And we had in this project many partners also from Thailand, including Raktai Foundation, Mahidol University, and so on and so forth. So the project ran for 5 years and included the members that I have mentioned at the beginning of my talk. The starting point of this project was that, okay, let's not start looking at what impact environmental change and climate change has on mobility pattern, but let's take mobility and migration as the starting point of the consideration, because migration is a key driver of global change. There are estimated around 1 billion people who are mobile, and I think this is a conservative estimation, as when it comes to particularly to internal migrants, the database for estimating the number of internal migrants is very, very weak. But there are also lots of international migrants who are migrating due to all sorts of different reasons: work, study, marriage, and so on and so forth. The second point of departure is that this migration, if people migrate, they are not just away, but they keep connections. And migration has implication also for the place of origin, and can have an impact on coping and adaptation to climate change. So the research objectives of this project was to understand socio-ecological changes induced by feedback process of migration, with the focus on the effect on social resilience to environmental risks in the place of origin of migrants. So just to highlight or repeat myself again, because very often when I present this project, people, I can convey the point that I want to make. So lots of research that is focusing on this migration environment nexus look into the relation between environmental stress, basically, and what implications environmental stress has on mobility pattern. That is not the starting point of this project. This project was looking at migration that's happening anyway, and the implication of this migration on climate change adaptation. For example, through the fact that people send back money, remittances, and how this remittance is spent, and what implication it has for climate change adaptation. So I think that's a very important shift in focus in research, which takes into account the full kind of importance and the full complexity of migration, moves beyond the consideration of migration as just a response to climate change. So the theoretical grounding of this project was based on consideration of social resilience and of translocality. And following slides, I would like to briefly go into detail of how we understood and we understand this two concepts. So social resilience, the property of the social system and its components, household communities, to deal with stress and perturbation, or to take opportunity to maintain and increase well-being while not compromising the well-being of its components. That's kind of our working definition of the Trans3 project. So it's important that there are different, when you consider social resilience, that there are different social scales, spatial scales, and also temporal scales that needs to be considered. Social resilience is also understood as related to three capacities: the capacity to cope, kind of that's restoration of well-being, and which seeks to maintain status quo; the capacity to adapt, that's securing future well-being through incremental change; and the capacity to transform, which aims at enhancing future well-being and which related to more radical changes. That is kind of social resilience. We were interested in the social resilience of households and household members who are in rural Thailand, who are exposed to environmental stress and different other forms of stress. The second conceptual approach was translocality. And so translocality is related to kind of livelihood diversification or delocalization of rural livelihood. That means that people are moving, and through this movement of people, kind of networks, translocal networks are established between place of origin and between place of destination of migrants. And through these networks, there are different flows which are facilitated: flows of money, flows of people, flows of ideas. And these flows have implications for the different places which are embedded in this network. And our hypothesis was that it has also implications and the potential to foster social resilience of rural households and rural communities. So by taking this translocal social resilience approach, we moved into a direction where we reconsider the unit of analysis from spatially bounded households and communities towards translocally situated livelihoods formations. So the unit of analysis has been kind of broadened to account for empirical reality. And so the second point is that we consider migrants and non-migrants as embedded in social ecological systems and take into account the social, spatial, and temporal scales that are needed to be taken into account in order to understand the implication of migration for climate change adaptation. So here, kind of the working definition of translocal social resilience, the capability of social system which is translocally embedded through its mobile and immobile components to deal with stress and perturbations and to take opportunities to maintain or increase its well-being while not compromising the well-being of its components. So this is the kind of conceptual frame of this Trans3 project. And based on this frame, different aspects have been addressed by different scholars who are depicted here. We had Kusopon Narishai-Kuson, who was focusing on the vulnerability and resilience to climatic risks in the places of origin, in the rural place of origin of migrants, and worked out kind of climate vulnerability and the role of migration in this livelihood vulnerability. There was also Till Rockenbauch, who addressed kind of the meso level, the networks, and who looked into the role of translocal networks in the context of translocal social resilience, and who adopted explicit social network analysis approach to study this aspect. And there were two additional PhD scholars who pursued more kind of ethnographic research, Louise Post and Simon Pate, multi-sited ethnography. Louise Post focused on rural to urban migrants, rural to urban migration in Thailand. So starting her research in North and Northeast Thailand, and kind of follow the migrants to the place of destination around Bangkok in order to understand the different social practices of translocality in internal migration. And the aspect of international migration was addressed by Simon Pate, who compared two different migration systems where Thai migrants are, international migration systems where Thai migrants are involved in, and which are very contrasting. So on the one hand, he studied Thai migrants to Singapore, kind of contract labor migration in a very specific setting, in the Singaporean setting, which I will address in a second, and compare this migration to love and marriage migration of Thai migrants to Germany, where kind of the embeddedness in the society, the context of migration is very different. And there we want to find out what the implications of this different kind of embedding in different migration systems are on adaptation. And lastly, Kaylee Ober looked into governance processes of translocal social resilience on different level, international level, and as well as national and local level. And Harald Sturley was the project coordinator who was running this project. Where did we conduct our research? So we started our work in 4 sub-districts in Northeast Thailand, kind of remote. These sub-districts are in no way representative of kind of rural Thailand. There were remote places. We were searching for places that were exposed to environmental risks and which were kind of far away from also urban areas where kind of commuting kind of living in rural area, but working in a kind of urban area was not possible. So there were more marginal remote places that we have included in our sample. One in Buriram, in Udon Thani, Phitsanulok, and in Chiang Rai. But as we had this translocal approach, we also conduct research in places of destination of migration, as I have mentioned before, in urban industrial centers in Thailand, but also for international migrants, we compared Thai migration to Singapore with Thai migration to Germany. This is kind of the case study setting of our project. Yeah, I think there's some more details about the areas of origin of migrants. So we selected these areas based on kind of risk exposure, rural livelihood system. Kind of agriculture should be kind of the dominant livelihood in the area, and we also looked into the embeddedness into different migration networks. But as I have said, these 4 sub-districts are of course not representative to Thai rural places, which are very diverse depending on where you are in central Thailand, southern Thailand, and all these kind of aspects hasn't been addressed here in this project. Here the areas of destination again for internal migrants, particularly in and around Bangkok, and for international migration, Singapore and Germany. We pursued mixed methods research design, had a panel survey, bigger household survey in this 4 rural place of origin, and also a follow-up survey with migrants in places of destination in Thailand. One of the PhDs did kind of network mapping. We used different methods out of the kind of PRA, Participatory Rural Appraisal toolbox, including focus group discussions, timelines, impact diagrams, and so on and so forth. And also one central method was multi-sited ethnography, focusing on the practices of translocal resilience of migrants there. Yeah, now let me come to the evidence and the results, or selected evidence and results from this research. And we'd like to start first with the role of networks, translocal and local networks, and the work from mainly from Till Rockenbauch, which has also been published in the paper Beyond the Local, exploring the social spatial pattern of translocal network capital and its role in household resilience in Northeast Thailand. What Till has done is he looked into eco-centered networks of households in the study areas and tried to find out how these households are embedded, what kind of networks they are embedded to, which kind of actors they have a relation, what kind of relation they have, how they rate their importance, and where these actors were located. If they're kind of local actors and then therefore local networks, or if this has been translocal networks. That means that Till kind of described in very very detailed the networks of households here in rural Thailand. So the results is depicted here in a graphic that is perhaps at the first sight not understandable, but which is very basic. So here you can see different dimensions of embedding in networks. So you see the share of relation, the frequency, how often is a certain network relation mentioned. The darker the blue shade, the higher the frequency, the share of relation. In this pie chart, you see the different types of relation. So what kind of support did the household get? Was it support of labor force? What's the support of advice, or was the support of finances? The plus and minus is related to if this relation are perceived to be significant or not so significant, and here you also see kind of to what kind of type of actor the household has a relation to, and to what kind, where these actors are located. Are they local, or are they basically translocal? So what we see from this network mapping is that support through kinship relation is perceived as particularly important. So household members and relatives are considered important network relation, but non-kinship based and formalized support has a substantial share in this relation. What you see here when we look at the kind of the geographical spread is that translocal ties account for a significant share of support of rural household, but a local level remains the single most important level when it comes to networks and how rural households are embedded into networks. And here the aspect that was most important for us, so migration-related ties, are considered also to be particularly important. So ties to household members and relatives who are located somewhere in Thailand or somewhere located abroad. But in all, there's quite a low share of the total relations, if you see. So what we took out of here is took out of this analysis of the support network of a rural household is that translocal networks are only kind of part of the story when it comes to the role of social networks, that we should not forget the role of also local networks, and Till did a good job in enabling us to get a kind of differentiated view. But we also see that particularly also for financial support from household members and relatives, migration-related ties are considered to be very important. And this is particularly in the context of international migration related to international remittances for household income. And here you see aggregated depiction of a self-assessment of household with international migrants and how much income from remittances, the share of income from remittances in the total share of income of a household. And you see here that particularly household with international migration, remittances are considered very important, has a very high share, and they are used for different things, including consumption, daily expenses, but also including investments in education, in agricultural machine, and in purchase for land. And all this spending of remittances has an implication also for climate change adaptation, which I will address in a second. Another aspect that needs to be considered is, so now we have seen the role of networks. Kind of the second dimension I want to highlight is the role of temporal dynamics and the role of processes. This is based on work mainly by Simon Pate, which is also published in a paper in Area, which is titled "When the Origin Becomes Destination: Lost Remittances and Social Resilience of Return Labor Migrants in Thailand." So one important thing is that we need to consider migration as process that is not just happening at one moment, but there's kind of a temporal dimension here. So there's people have their daily life embedded in the local context, and then something changed. For example, a marriage, foundation of a family, a drought, or a finishing of a school, and this leads to kind of the aspiration to migrate, which kind of comes into kind of a formation phase where people get information about migration and see if they are able to migrate, if they have the capability to migrate, and then there's the journey, there's the adjustment in the place of destination, and then the situation in the place of destination might change again, which might lead to a decision to kind of move back and to stop over, go back to the home country in order to migrate again. It might end in a kind of a decision to return more permanently, or in the decision to stay longer. And this consideration of migration as a process is important, as in the different phases of this migration has implications, for example, on the flow also of remittances, for example. So, and this is for the case of international migrants, international contract labor migration, which is very often linked to credits that the household has to get. And so in the first phase of migration, when people just work in order to be able to pay back their debts, there won't be kind of positive implication for the household's livelihoods and for the household's adaptation. But after a consolidation phase, also perhaps when migrants are able to advance, to get a promotion, to earn more money, so the remittance flows are increasing, and the potential that these remittances are invested accordingly is also higher. And so in these different phases, there are different implications for the flow of remittances, but also the flow of social remittances. And this paper that I just highlighted, Simon was addressing the issue that in certain kinds of migrations and regimes of migration, for example, the migration to Singapore into the construction sector, the skill. So the social remittances, that the potential of acquiring social remittances, which might have a positive impact after the return, it's constrained due to the character of the migration and the work of the migrants in these places. This also leads me to the third result that I would like to present. Just a brief question in terms of time. I'm still okay, or I'm lost a bit the overview?
Yeah, actually, I still have like 12 minutes. Actually, yeah, you can you can keep going on. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks. So taking the translocal resilience approach, one important dimension is the dimension of embeddedness. I addressed that a bit already. So here the assumption is that migrants are migrating to a place of destination, and they are embedded and integrated in this place of destination in very different manner. And the way that they are embedded there has implications for their linkages that they have to the places of origin. And here I also would like to present Simon Pate's work, and particularly the case of migration to Singapore. So Singapore has been in the past and the role quite important destination country for Thai migrants, but this importance is rapidly declining. And the number of Thai migrants that are there now, it's not comparable to many years ago. I think all of you know Singapore. It's a country that has one of the highest GDP worldwide, which has gone through a very rapid economic development. It's an important port and also an important financial hub. And behind kind of this development, this is how Singapore looks like in 2011. The migrant workers played a quite significant and important role. So the Singaporean economy is very much dependent on migrant workers, also on kind of semi-skilled labor migrants, which make up around almost 39% of the total workforce. so this labor migrants come from different countries: Bangladesh, Myanmar, Philippines, Vietnam, China, but also from Thailand. And Singapore has a very specific, particularly looking at it from an Austrian or a German perspective, but I think also from a Thai perspective, very specific regime of migration. So it's very tightly regulated. There's a high level of organization. So for semi-skilled and low-skilled workers who want to work in Singapore and have to go to training centers, there's strict control to the Ministry of Manpower. There's a quota system for foreign workers, a levy rate that employers have to pay. And this is geared towards the kind of the ability to steer the proportion and nationality and sectoral distribution of migrant workers in a short period of time. So what does that mean with regard to, for example, to connectedness and to the flow of remittances, for example? In the research on remittances, there's this remittance decay hypothesis that individual remittances will decline over time. The longer the migrants are staying in the place of destination, the less remittances will flow. But this couldn't be seen or cannot be observed for Thai migrants in Singapore, and this is related to the fact that Thai migrants in Singapore, we're talking here about the semi-skilled migrants, low and semi-skilled migrants, facing kind of a structural segregation in Singapore. So they are living and working on the edge of the Singaporean society. So Thai migrants can work as migrants from other countries in very specific sector only. Here for Thai migrants in the construction sector, in the past in the port, but the port is very much automatized and doesn't play such an important role anymore. Migrants, most of the migrants are living in so-called dormitories, workers' shelters, which you can see here on this map, which are spread over the city-state of Singapore, and which are of course located where the industrial areas are located. So the Singaporean state seek to kind of segregate these workers from the general Singaporean society. They have the dormitories with all the facilities that you need, supermarkets, gym, cinemas, and so on and so forth. So in the free time, the workers don't have any need to go somewhere else, but they can just stay there. Yes, kind of one of the dormitories that also Simon has visited with 16,000 capacity of 16,000 beds. It's kind of a smaller city here in Austria. So the migrants are living basically in these dormitories at the edge of the Singaporean society. So they are not only segregated in terms of working, living, but also in terms of mobility. So this is how migrants in Singapore are transported. Actually forbidden in the general traffic rule, but allowed for migrant workers. So that's another kind of dimension of this structural segregation. And so Thai migrants and migrants, low-skilled migrants from other countries in Singapore are facing this structural segregation. They are not able to be integrated in the Singaporean society. They face what Collins call permanent temporariness. Even though some of the migrants work in Singapore for 20 years, they work always on temporary contracts without the ability to get their family there and without the ability to settle in Singapore. And this has a very specific, very strong implications for how the migrants are connected to Thailand. So there's very strong orientation towards home. And this then can be seen in the context of remittances sending. So there's no remittance decline, but there's a continuous remittance flow due to the character of the Singaporean immigration context. And here, of course, you can discuss from a rural household perspective in Thailand. This is a beneficial thing. So you don't have to fear decline of remittances. You can be sure that this income flow will be there. But if you take the position of the migrants themselves and the way they are living and working in Singapore and their well-being, so the assessment might be different. So the last part, I will have to speed up a little bit, is a work on rural-urban migration from Louise Porst, and here I want to highlight kind of the aspect of social differentiation in the context of translocal resilience. So what we could say is that migration as adaptation doesn't work for everybody in the same way, and there's a trend, a pattern that those who are doing well already will also be more able to utilize migration as an adaptation strategy and profit from migration. So inequality is reproduced basically also in the translocal sphere. And to highlight this, I just want to give two insights into case studies. So we have identified different pathways of translocal resilience. One pathway of stagnation and decline, and here's a case of Nun, who is 42 years old garment worker in Bangkok. She's originally from Northeast Thailand. She has 11 siblings, just primary education, and her family in the Northeast has very limited access to land. So also in the rural context, a poor household. She's divorced and she's living with her 2 kids in Bangkok. Due to her low educational status, she is precariously employed in a subcontracting company in the textile sector with low income, unstable employment. And in this concrete case, there was a drought that her family suffered, so there was need for additional money. So Nun had to get informal credit to support her family back home. So here we see a case where the rural urban migrant, here in the case of Nun, is moving to Bangkok, but is not able to kind of improve her livelihood and her well-being. But he's trapped in this situation because the family back home is dependent on her support. But both of them are not able to kind of advance, and so they're trapped in this situation where they rely on migration. Even though she wants to move back, she cannot move back as she has to support her family. But this migration is not sufficient to allow her to advance. And another example, kind of on the other end of the continuum, here's pathway of growth. There's the case study. Or the case of Bom. He's 45 years old. His family, he's coming also from a rather poor family with little land. But when he was 19, he decided to go to Singapore, and he stayed there for 21 years. He was able to make also a career in Singapore as a foreman. And at the end, he was able to send back 1,500 euros to his family per month, which he invested in land. And he also reported here to Simon that in Singapore he learned to think big and to make business. Once he came back, he started kind of different businesses, including a pig farm, karaoke bar, and so on and so forth. And so in this case, migration allowed Bom to kind of diversify his livelihoods, and which increase his resilience as he is not so susceptible kind of to climatic risks. So resilience through translocality is socially differentiated, and what we see is basically a reproduction of inequality in translocal space. Okay, with this I come to the conclusion already. So what I hope I could show that migration can contribute to increase of social resilience, but it also can lead to reproduction of vulnerability, and it depends on translocal constellations. So the social dimension, the spatial dimension, and so also the temporal dimension needs to be taken into account. The embedding and the situation in the place of origin as well as the place of destination are important to consider, and they are very often mutually influencing each other. And the last point is that understanding social resilience also requires the consideration of social, spatial, and temporal skills. So thank you very much. I hope it was interesting, and looking forward for questions and critical questions, and anything that I can clarify, I'm happy to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Patrick. Okay, can we stop recording now?
Yes.